Every year, people from different countries around the world relocate to the USA to become permanent legal residents. For example, in the year 2022, about 2.1 million people relocated from various countries around the world to the USA. According to USA facts, out of these 2.1 million people, about 5,014 were Kenyans. Some of the reasons why many people relocate to the USA is in pursuit of better education. Today, I have invited a friend of mine to come and explain to us the American education system. His name is Daniel Damiano. I want him to help us understand how the American education system works, because USA is considered to have the best education system in the world. But despite all this, there are many Americans who are opting to homeschool their children. Daniel himself is a key proponent of homeschooling. So I want him to help us understand all these concepts: homeschooling, public school, private school. My name is Windsor, and this is Moving Pictures Kenya, connecting people, inspiring humanity. And today I wanted us to talk about the American education system, because most people come to the US with young families, school-going children, but they never understand how it works until you get here, so you don't know where to go. Right. So sometimes when we make videos like this, people planning to come to the US at least have an idea on where to start. Okay. So maybe in general, before we go to homeschooling, you can just basically take us through how the American education system works from the low level up to the upper level.
So usually kids from a younger age, they go to preschool, they go to kindergarten, they learn those basic skills there before going into more of the bigger education systems. They sit in the classroom, they go through different requirements. The law states that there are certain requirements that these kids need to meet before progressing into different grades. The public school education system, everybody's trained the same thing. Everybody is in the classroom. Basically, they have different requirements that the law states. It's the same thing with homeschooling, that they have to show proficiency in certain things: reading, writing, math, science, history, English, language arts. Those different things are all required by the state, whether it's public school or homeschooling.
Yeah, when we were coming here, people told us that never think about private school because you'll not afford. It is public school. Right. Now, when we got here, just looking at the buildings of the public school back home in Kenya, that would be a very high-end, very expensive private school. So how does it work? Because like me, when I went to school, it's many years ago, so our system was called 844. Okay. So you go to primary school for 8 years, then you go to high school for 4 years, and you go to university for 4 years. The Kenyan education system every year is divided into 3 terms. So one term is 3 months. So you go to school from January to March, then you close for 1 month. Then you go from May to end of July, you close for another month. You go from September to November, you close for another month. So at the end of every, we call that a term. So at the end of every term, you do an exam. Then at the end of the year, that exam will enable you go to the next class. Okay. And then after like the 8 years, now you do a final exam for primary school. So that final exam, you get a primary school certificate. Then that certificate will enable you to go to high school. Then in high school, again, the same thing for 4 years. Then at the end of 4 years, we do an exam. That exam, you get a high school certificate. I think it's here what you call high school diploma.
Yes.
Then now, if you are successful in that high school, now you go to university for another 4 years. So I don't know here, how does it work?
That's pretty much the same thing. You have the 8 years plus the 4 years of high school, and then you can choose whether or not you want to go to a university or not. You can go for 4 years, you could go for 8 years. My brother went to Penn State to go get a degree in physical therapy, and he got a 4-year degree in about 2 or 3 years. So you can do different things to speed up that stuff. Same thing in high school. So when I went through, assuming that it's the same way for public school, you're able to go through different classes in the senior year of high school and actually get certain credits towards your college and cut down on some of the years. You can go through the summer and shorten your term and still get a credited 4-year degree in 2.5, 3 years, or maybe even less, depending on how your testing goes. Here, there's usually about a 3-month break for the summer, and then the rest of the 9 months of the year, you're in school. It's Monday through Friday. I know that since COVID, they've had half days and different things, so I'm not too sure how it's structured now, but usually it's from 7 or 8 in the morning to 2, 3 in the afternoon, and then they come home. They have homework, they have all that stuff. Similar with homeschooling. And then there's standardized testing, I believe, in 3rd grade, 5th grade, and I want to say 8th or 9th grade before you go and start your 4 years of high school. And then at the end of the 4 years of high school, you have a test that you end up taking that gives you your grade point average. All that stuff needs to be submitted to the state to show that you are ready to receive that high school diploma.
You talk of high school diploma, because I understand it appears like that is the most important certification that somebody can have here.
Sure.
And it's like most Americans don't prefer to further education after high school, you know.
Sure.
I don't know why that is the case.
So when it comes to employment, they look for a high school diploma because when you get that, it's assuming that you know how to read, you know how to write, and you know how to be able to do basic math skills. Those are all the kind of the big requirements that you end up learning in high school. There's other things, history, science, different things that you might not use, but it helps with your everyday life. And that's really what the education system was set up, was to enable kids that by the time that they're ready to go into the workforce, that they're prepared for it. That was the whole point of, that's the whole point of really schooling in general, is to prepare you for the real world. Most people don't end up going through college because 1, it's usually pretty expensive, and 2, depending on what you want to do, you don't really need a college degree. Not here in the US, where if you have an entrepreneurial mind and you really just boots on the ground, grind, you can make a living without that education and without having to go to debt. You spend tens of thousands of dollars to end up getting a piece of paper saying that you learned a thing, and most of the time you don't even end up using the degree that you paid all that money for. Mm-hmm. I think that it's better to go through a technical school than it is to go through a college. I think college is a scam for the most part, unless you're going to become a lawyer, a doctor, or even a pastor, you know. But even back then, when the college system even started, you weren't in a classroom, you were on the field and you were getting your hands dirty. Nowadays, you could go and you could get a 4-year degree in yodeling and be $30,000 or more in debt. And what did you accomplish? Mm-hmm. Not a whole lot of anything. I also think that one of the other reasons why most people don't end up pursuing a higher education is because they're never really trained on what their options are. Personally, the education system, the public school system, hasn't equipped kids for the real world and really tailored their needs to their level, to what their interests are. They're told, this is what you need to learn, and this is what's going to end up happening, and then they're just kind of lost in somewhere in the middle, and they're never given any kind of direction to be able to pursue what they want in their life. They don't even know most of the time. You ask them, what is your what do you think your life is going to look like in 5 years? Most kids can't even think into 5 days from now, let alone 5 years. And that's one thing that I think that the education system has failed to provide for these kids, is a clear picture of what their future can be and how they can pursue their vision to be able to do that.
Yeah, you know, that is what surprised me, because like back home in Kenya, when you take your child to school, you want them to achieve the highest grades possible, so that you become a doctor, and you work in a bank. But here I was surprised, somebody earning in a bank earns much less than somebody earning in a factory. That was surprising to me.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why that is, and especially if you have a degree that's, useful, like a doctor. Obviously, doctors are making more than a factory worker. But a factory worker, when I left high school, I started working on the back of a forklift. I did that. I didn't need a higher education other than that. All I needed was a high school diploma or the equivalent, a GED or something like that, because all I'm doing is reading the label, picking it up with the forklift, and dropping it off to where it needs to go. I really don't need to go to a college for 4 years to learn how to do that. And it's just the unfortunate thing of the way then the world, here in the US anyway, is set up. And some people might say that that's by design. Then the US doesn't really benefit the people that work really, really hard, and that might be true to a degree, but I'm an example of then I worked really hard for what I've had. Even though that I went to college, I was only for 2 years. I was pursuing a business degree, and I ended up dropping out. My grade point average was low. I was working full time so that I was able to pay my way through college. I didn't have any time to study and test, and even then I wasn't able to pass a lot of the tests that I needed to be able to. Instead of just spending the money and everything, I just ended up dropping out. I was making a lot of money for my age. I was on a path in the place that I started at that if I wanted to, I could have moved up in management, but a lot of things ended up falling through. I started butting head with a lot of my bosses, and they were taking advantage of me, and I ended up leaving and started bouncing around until I landed in the job that I'm at today, which you even know you don't need a higher education to be able to be in corrections or anything like that. But there are a lot of guys that have that criminal justice degree, but they are using the jobs as a stepping stone. And again, I don't think that's something that the kids are today prepared for, is that just because you have a degree, just because you have these skills, that when you go into the workforce, you're not going to be making 30, 40, 50, 60 bucks, right? Like, you got to build up to that. And a lot of kids think that just because you went and you received a higher education, that you deserve to be in that position making that kind of money right away, when that's not always the case.
Yeah, when I meet many people, they always want to know about Kenya, and there is quite a big difference between the Kenyan system and the American system. So like for us in Kenya, anybody who is going to public school, first of all, you'll pay school fees, and then there is nothing like school bus, so you will walk to school or run to school. And then even the infrastructure itself is is wanting. But when we came here, I was surprised. My kids got to school, the first thing they are given, laptop, or is it iPad, and then they are picked by school bus, and you do not pay anything, and then at the school they are given lunch, but that is different from back home. So I really don't know how this works or who finances this, so that it's like you're schooling free.
So even though that it looks free on the surface, we pay for it in our taxes. And depending on the school district that you are, your taxes fluctuate. There is a school tax, and a lot of the time people have that escrowed into their mortgage with their houses. But just because it looks free on the surface, they're given an iPad, they're given a laptop, they're given a lunch. You don't pay little to anything out of pocket. It's not true because it's coming out of our taxes. And because of that, I think that we, as citizens, should be involved in what's being taught in the public school. If I'm paying for it, I want to know what's being taught in those classrooms.
Okay. Yeah, you talk about school district, and that is interesting because, again, I'll relate to my coming here. When we were coming here, we were told in the US there is something called school district, whereby where you live is where you go to school. You cannot even cross the road to the other side.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe you can explain to us that concept of school district.
So I'm not sure why it was set up that way. I'm sure that it was because of a couple hundred years ago or something like that, that it was just more convenient because you didn't really have the mode of transportation that we have today. But you live in a certain part of the district, you live so many miles from the school, that's the school that you go to. A lot of families determine where they end up living so that they're in a nicer school district. And if it's a nicer school district, chances are you're going to be paying more in houses. The price of your house, your mortgage, or I should say your taxes, not so much your mortgage, but your taxes are all determined by the school district. They got good grades, they got good numbers, they have all these testing scores that show that you're getting a decent education there. Those can influence your taxes. I don't know exactly why it's set up that way. It just kind of is. And do I agree with it? Not really. I know Canada, I believe, has a system where you're given a voucher. It's basically a check, and you can determine where you want to go. So if you want to drive 30 minutes away to a better school than the one that that's within your district, you could go, you could take that voucher and you could give that to the school and your kid could go to that school. That's not the case here a lot of the time. And I think that's where private schools come into play, because I don't think that's district restricting. You can go, if there's a private school that you want to go to, you just go to it.
Okay. Yeah, when you talk of better school, I think maybe for me, the schools I saw here, or I see here, there is nothing I can compare to. They are superior. Like me, when I went to school, if I give you a brief history of when I went to school. First of all, in the whole village that we were living, I think there was only one person who had a car. It was a truck. Only one person. So even just seeing a car, it was that person to come from, he worked in the city. So he comes from the city, then we can see it. But otherwise, the school, our walls, were made of mud. The floor was just, mud. So every Friday, we could carry cow dung to school. Now, cow dung was basically to smear on the floor so that you prevent the things like fleas. It was the way of preserving the floor. So when you come here and find such facilities, you get amazed. And then maybe that brings to the issue of, you talked about taxes. In Kenya, the taxes that we pay a lot is income tax. Mm-hmm. They call it pay as you earn, what is deducted from the salary. Right. Once you pay that, that is it. So we don't have property taxes. Right. So these houses, if I was in Kenya, once you buy it like this, maybe you may pay something like stamp duty or excise duty, but once you are done with that, it is your house, no other payment to the government. So here, property taxes, how does it relate to the school system?
So property taxes, regardless of whether or not you own your house. My grandmother, who just turned 100 this year, is still paying property tax. She's still paying school tax. Even though then her children are old, grown, and have kids of their own, they're still paying school tax. I don't know why that is. I think that is theft. Unless your kid is in school, I don't think that you should be paying property tax and all that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if our taxes influence the school, but I think it's the other way around, that the school influences our taxes. Mm. How many kids are going to that building, how big the building is, the maintenance of that building. I think that all that is determined by the individual districts, and they're given a money amount, and it's divvied across everyone that lives within that district.
Okay. So we've talked about like an introduction about the American education system, and based on what we've talked about, I think American education system is superior. But for me, despite this superiority, you find that Americans still prefer to have what they call homeschooling.
Yes.
So I wanted you to take us through what this concept of homeschooling, when it started, what it means.
So homeschooling started way before even a public education system was even founded. The first tax-funded public school was the 1620s, I believe it was. And up until then, most of everyone taught at home. They were taught the basic things to be able to learn to read, write, how to do basic math, how to survive, how to take care of the land that you're given, to prepare yourself that by the time that you get married, you move out of the house, then you have the ability and the means to be able to go and succeed in life. So homeschooling does the same thing that the public education system does, public school does. They have to follow the same standardized tests. You have to provide a portfolio of the child and all the stuff that they've learned through the school year, just like the public school. So you're doing all the legwork that the public school would already be doing and providing all that information to the state. Where homeschooling shines over public school is then you can tailor the education to the individual needs of the child. And I believe it was Albert Einstein that is quoted in saying that if you judge a fish by its ability to fly, it will spend its entire life thinking it's stupid. You can meet the child on its individual needs a lot better than you can in the public school system through it. But they don't talk about the individual things that are in there, that we have God-given rights. Then, you know, our system of government is set up in such a way that we are able to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government. None of that stuff, a lot of times, might not be taught in public school, where in homeschooling, if you feel that that is important, you can teach that stuff. So you can teach your kid, you have more freedom and more flexibility of what you want your kid to know going forward. Okay. And it's all about the intentionality of the parents. Really, at the end of the day, whether you choose homeschooling or public schooling, it's all about the intentionality of the parents. Okay. If the public school is teaching one thing and you don't necessarily agree with it, you need to pull your kid aside and you need to say, well, this is the way that it is in reality. Just because they're teaching this might not necessarily be true. You know, that's where you get an education as opposed to an indoctrination. If you're only taught one side of the story, you're getting an indoctrination. You're not given an education.
Please make me understand. Homeschooling, is it online based? Is it like you invite a teacher to your home? Or is it like you have a class somewhere where your kids go and, you know, study privately? Or is it like you as a parent teach your own kids?
It's really all of that. So I did cyber schooling for a little bit, where we enrolled in a program. They gave us a computer that I was able to do all the work from. I took all the tests on there. Everything was submitted on there. We did that for a number of years. My high school years was mainly a box curriculum, and I believe it was called My Father's World, where it was biblically based, and everything was tailored around the Bible and what was going on during that time period. So as I was reading through a lot of the historical books of the Bible, I was also learning, what did Egypt look at that time? What did Mesopotamia as a whole look like? What was going on in different parts of the world while the different historical events that were going through the Bible took place? You have co-ops. So I did once a week where I was in something of a classroom with a bunch of homeschoolers, and we learned about personal finances. We went to a place within the city I can't even remember the name of that place now. But we were all given jobs, we were all given a salary, and we had to operate within a make-believe town and operate within there, given the roles that we were given, and put the skills that we learned through those weeks of learning those personal finances. There's co-ops, so I taught for a little bit physical education with a group of homeschoolers that met at a church. So it's very flexible in that you could be the teacher yourself, especially if you are efficient in something. So if you're an engineer or you're an accountant or you are really skilled in a particular area in schooling, you could do that teaching. And if you're not, there's curriculum that you can buy to fill in the gaps. You can go to these co-ops where you might have someone that's an engineer or have someone that works within the banking system to teach personal financing. That was the case with me. So you find those people within your community and you can get together and do that stuff, or you could do everything at home by yourself. That's where a lot of that flexibility comes from, in that you are given a well-rounded education. There's a lot of resources that are out there. Then you can do it. It's budget friendly. There's a lot of free resources. There's a lot of people within the community, especially here in York. You have the York Homeschool Association, which I was a part of, where it's, I don't know how many families that are all involved, and you're able to get together. They have different events. So one event that we did, we went to the Philadelphia Zoo, and we were able to get a group discount because of all the tickets that were bought. You don't have to meet up with one another, but we were able to coordinate in such a way that we were able to get a discount and being able to do stuff like that. There's also people within the community that know all the laws for the individual states and will help you put the paperwork together, so that you don't end up getting in trouble with the government and saying that you're not giving your kid an education.
Okay.
So there's a lot of resources. It's really flexible, and then you get to pick what that education looks like. Whether you want it to be more centered around what you believe religiously or what you believe naturalistically, whatever the case may be, you can build all of that around your family's values, but also the individual needs of the child.
Okay. So in homeschooling, how are exams administered? Are there exams in homeschooling, and how are they administered?
There are tests. So like in math, the math curriculum that I used had tests in the back for the individual lessons that I would take. And then my mom would take those tests, make a copy of them, and we'll put them in a portfolio, and then they would send that off when it came to time with evaluation. You sit in front of an evaluator, they go over everything that you learned during the school period. They would ask the child a couple of questions and interview them to really see if they knew what they had learned over that time period.
Okay. So it's you just get a certification, not like a grade. Is it like grade? You say like this one got this number of points, or is just a certification?
No, on the individual tasks, you would tally it up and you would give it the different grades. So if you really want, you could do a report card so that the kid can see, almost similar to public school. My parents never really did that. I think they might have did that for a school season or two, and I was like, well, I already knew this. Like, I already knew that I was getting straight A's in all of this. Like, I don't need a card telling me otherwise. Okay. And the evaluator sees all of that anyway because of the individual grades that are on there. That would be something that the parent does, then almost similar to what the teacher does when you turn in your homework the following day. They sit down, they look over the individual answers, they grade the paper, and then that paper gets set aside in the child's individual portfolio and then is submitted to the state at the end of the year.
Okay. So sometimes people take pride in the school they went to.
Yes.
You know, somebody will say, I went to Dallastown school, I went to Red Lion. So in homeschooling, how can somebody achieve that? You know, take pride in something.
Well, for one thing, homeschoolers statistically are smarter than those that are in public school. So anyone that wants to say, well, I went to Dallastown, and you could say, well, I went to homeschool, and they could say, so what? You could look at them and say, well, statistically, I'm smarter than you are. So, and you can still participate within public school. So the law requires that the individual schools, depending on the district that you're in, if you want to play any sports, you can participate in those sports. So even though that you might not be in the public school system, you can still be a part of it to some degree and participate in a lot of the sporting activities that they have. There might be other opportunities, but growing up, that's what me and my family did. Me and my brothers played baseball for a little bit. I had a little bit of an interest in playing football, but I never really pursued that. But we were able to play in the Eastertown District over in Wrightsville, and we were able to play on the baseball team that was a part of that school there.
Okay. So maybe for parents, let me talk about American parents first of all before we talk about the immigrants. What would be your advice to them about homeschooling?
Be intentional. Be involved in your kid's life. You don't want to abandon your child. We see the things that are going on in the world, and we see a lot of parents that are absent in the kid's life, whether that's the dad or both parents are working, whatever the case may be. That's even the same thing with public schooling. Private, public, homeschooling, be intentional. Don't abandon your kids. Be involved in their life and take an interest in what they want to learn and find a way to be able to nurture that. My daughter is really interested in space. And if there's one day that she said, I want to work for NASA, then I can build her curriculum in such a way that she's meeting the state requirements, but then also tailoring all that stuff in high school so that she can be equipped to be able to apply for a job at NASA. We can pull her aside and be like, okay, this is the additional education that you would need to know when you would go to college. And we could prepare her for that when she's ready to go into there. The other thing is then we as parents need to equip our kids for an unknown world. Our world is crazy how fast it's changing on a day-to-day basis. And knowing how to prepare your kids for the future is probably one of the biggest things that we as parents can do to equip their kids for that stuff. Just be involved in your kids' life. Be intentional. Watch them. See what their interests are. Be observant, not only of your kid, but everything that's going on and around the world. And I think that as parents is one of the biggest things that we can do to help kids.
Okay. Yeah, because I know those people who are wishing to come to the USA may think that maybe they may not afford this, because in Kenya, I don't think whether we really have homeschooling, or if it's there, it's for the very wealthy who can afford. So what we may have that may be closer to homeschooling is what they call private tuition. So basically what happens over the holidays, you invite a teacher to come to your house, and then take your child through areas that they are weak. Or if not that, you collect yourselves into a group of kids and then hire a teacher, to take you through classes. So I know, it's not especially those people who go to public schools, that private tuition is not their thing, So I know, what would you tell the immigrants, because they may think it's too expensive for them to afford?
Especially here in the U.S. Obviously, I can't speak to what, the goings on in Kenya and everything. But in here, it's not that it's expensive, but it can put strain almost seems like too harsh of a word. Because right now, the way that the U.S. is set up in such a way that both parents need to work. Well, if both parents need to work, obviously, it's kind of rough in order to be able to teach a kid, especially if both parents are working the same shift. You might be able to wiggle it around, and I'm sure that there's parents that are able to do that. It's not that it's expensive to be able to do, it's just that it could make other aspects of your life a little harder financially. But you need to ask yourself, what's more important? That my kids are getting an education and not an indoctrination? And is my comfort more important over the well-being of my child? Then I think is one of the bigger questions then you need to ask yourself. And homeschooling might not be for everyone. Like I'm very pro homeschool, but I understand that the individual families might not be able to do that. I think that it's more important. I think that we have a God-given right to be able to teach our kids in the way they should go, and they won't depart from that. Like, I think that we need to be involved with our kids. I think that's more important. Whether or not you're able to do it financially is one thing, but you got to find what works best for your family. If you're able to do public school, be involved in your kids' life and making sure that what they're being taught is something that you agree with.
Okay.
Whether that's private school, a lot of the time, you can pick a private school that's tailored based on what you would want the kid to know. And then homeschooling, same thing. You can tailor all that stuff. You have more flexibility in being able to do that, but you want to make sure that what you're doing is in the best interest of your child.
Okay. And then I notice here in the US, child welfare is taken seriously. I know even when kids go to school, nobody can be absent without a reason. So for homeschooling, is there anywhere you register so that they know that Bonaventure's child is being homeschooled? Or how does the state monitor that your child is getting education?
It is all based on the evaluator. So at the end of the school period, you have the portfolio of all the things that your kid has learned over the year. And the state requires certain things that you have to show. That's writing, that's language arts, that's English, that's math, that's history. All that stuff needs to be present. And then everything else you can add in there so that they can see everything that they learned over the school year. But there's certain things within the state that you have to show the individual state. But really, I don't know of anything that's in place. Like, no one's going to come knocking at your door to make sure that there's a parent home teaching the kid. So that's where the evaluator kind of comes into play, but you only see them once a year. You only see them at the end of the school period, or the end of the school year.
Okay.
And the parents, they can abandon their kids. Unfortunately, that might be the case in some families. And unless someone reports it to the state and child services are able to step in, or some other authority that is able to say, if you are doing this to the kid, we're going to intervene. I don't know of anything that's really in place to prevent all that stuff from happening within a homeschooling family. The biggest thing that I would have people know about homeschooling is that it is inexpensive. It is very accessible for everyone here in the US. I think that you get a better education. You actually get an education within homeschooling as opposed to public schooling. You can look throughout history and see that different US presidents were all homeschooled. A lot of entrepreneurs that were homeschooled, some never even went to college or college dropouts. You really need to ask yourself the question, like, what's being taught behind those walls? Is it good for my kid? The other thing that I would also know, the schools give the kids iPads, laptops. Obviously, we as adults we know that stuff is tools, but we don't know what the kids are really using with that stuff. There's no long-term studies showing the effects that they have on the kids' development, and the studies that are out there aren't promising. They could be very damaging to the child's development. There's certain white matter within the brain that doesn't grow depending on the hours on end that you're staring at an iPad. And a lot of that, I'm sure, has a lot to do with what you're doing on there as opposed to just using the thing. But even Steve Jobs, when the iPhone and the iPad started coming out, said that he would never let his kids use an iPad. Ask yourself why. The CEO of Microsoft said that he would never give his kids a smartphone. Ask yourself why. If a lot of these people that seem to be running our worlds in one way or another are doing one thing but telling you to do something else, ask yourself why. A lot of people then started the idea of the Department of Education homeschooled their kids. They don't even put their kids through public school. There's more, I think, of a reason to homeschool your kids than public school, but I think the more important thing is being intentional and being involved in your kid's life. Like I said, I believe that we are given the right to be able to raise our kids. You know, like I said, my education was surrounded by the teachings of the Bible. You know, then we are to train a child in the way that he or she is supposed to go, and they will not depart from that. And I get that not everybody wants that to be the main focus, but it doesn't need to be the main focus. I think it should be, me personally, but you know, I understand, like, when they think of homeschooling, they think religious nut jobs, they think of anti-vaxxers. There's a lot of reason why people would homeschool, and that might be for that reason. A lot of public schools require vaccination and proof of vaccination, and a lot of people don't trust that stuff. That's one reason why they might homeschool. Another reason might be because of what's being taught in schools. You know, it was in the 1960s then prayer, Bible reading, all that stuff was removed from schools. It wasn't part of a requirement to be part of the school day. And ever since then, you can look at statistics. School shootings have gone up, teen pregnancies have gone up, drug and alcohol use among teens are going up. And ask yourself why. What's one of the big things that they're teaching in public schools? And one thing that I've seen, and I don't know if it's every school, but I know that there's a lot of schools and there's a lot of colleges that are taught that you're stardust, that you're an evolved animal, that your life has no purpose and no meaning, and at the end of that life, that's it. You're nothing. That's a pretty depressing message for the future of our kids. Then there's nothing that you can do, even if you do at the end of your life make it a better place to live in for everybody else, that after you die, then there's really nothing to look forward to, and someone's going to mess up all the way. Then why do anything at all? Where if you want to teach your kids, then there is purpose. You're created in the image of God. You're given a purpose for your life. There's a reason why you're here, why we're here talking today. And hopefully this will be an encouragement to some of your listeners, is that, you know, we're made in the image of God. Then he sent his son, then he died on a cross. He died for our sins, and 3 days later he rose again. And he's coming back to judge us. Then, you know, going out and teaching our kids to not only prepare ourselves for the coming Lord, but telling others that as well. You know, Jesus said, you know, the golden rule, you know, treat those how you would want to be treated. Where the school says it doesn't really matter how you treat someone. They're not given a message of hope. And you can give that to your individual kids, and we would pray as parents that they wouldn't depart from that. And at the very least, they would have the tools to be able to equip that when they come into a scenario like that, especially when they go into college and they have that professor that tells them then you're stardust, that you're a cosmic accident, and you can't help but think the way that your brain fizzes. They are equipped to be in such a way that they can come to that professor and say, well, actually, you're wrong, and be able to explain why they're wrong.
I was thinking of COVID and the special circumstances that make homeschooling popular.
Yeah, so I know that homeschooling was really popular because we didn't really have much of a choice. We were all locked in. And I know that for the homeschooling family that was already homeschooling, nothing really changed. It was just your typical day to day. But for everyone that was in a public school setting and went home to go and take classes online, like, it was a culture shock for a lot of people. And ended up being something of a negative time depending on how old the kids were. There was a lot of kids that, because of wearing the mask, they couldn't see how the lips move, so they ended up developing speech impediments, so they had to have the early intervention to be able to counteract all that stuff. We were made to be social creatures. We're meant for community. I think that we're designed in that way. Then we're supposed to be involved in each other's lives. And the way then we're designed and the way that our brain develops shows that. COVID broke a lot of people, especially for those that didn't have any hope. Suicides went through the roof during COVID because we didn't have community. We weren't able to. Some churches were closed. Schools obviously were closed. We were afraid to walk outside our houses, and it had a pretty big negative effect on people. And it still has today. I've noticed that a lot of people don't know how to interact with one another. And that's the one thing that homeschooling gets a pretty bad rap, is that they don't have the socializing aspect, and that's just simply not true. You have church, you have sports, you have co-ops, you have your neighborhood, you have those individual things, but then during COVID, all that we had was our phone and laptops, and we connected over social media, and we forgot how to act like this, face to face, one another, having a conversation. We've lost that ability, and the younger generation is suffering from that. They don't know how to act with individual people on a personal level like this.
Yeah, true. So as we finalize, because many people have gone through different education systems and achieved different things in life, so are there like prominent Americans whom you can tell somebody, look and so, look at so and so, they went through homeschooling and look at where they are?
So, like I said, there are certain different there's different U.S. presidents that were homeschooled. You know, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. You can go through the whole list and see all the ones. So if we have U.S. presidents that are homeschooled, you know, then that should be a pretty good indicator that these guys are pretty well educated. You might want to argue about current presidents in recent years and everything, but that's we'll leave that aside. You know, the late Charlie Kirk, I don't believe that he was homeschooled, but he was a big proponent of homeschooling. He even said, and I agree with him, that homeschoolers were one day going to rule the world. And that's because they're given an education. They're taught how the world operates and why. They're not just taught that, you know, E equals MC squared, or 2 + 2 = 4, or these different things, just so that they could pass the test. But then they're actually given the tools to know how to function within normal life. I'm trying to think of anybody else that might have been homeschooled. There's no one that really comes to mind, not off the top of my head. But that doesn't mean that there isn't people that are out there. Yeah, I can't really think of anyone that is pretty influential within the lives of young people that were homeschooled one point or another. Okay. So I want to appreciate you for accepting to talk to us today. I make these videos and put on YouTube. Sometimes people watch, sometimes people don't. But the truth is that the few who watch
it really helps them, because I normally see the comments, I normally see how it changes people. Sometimes I just wonder if my videos had thousands of views, I could have changed the world.
Sure.
So I thank you for accepting to talk to us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's always been a big part of my life, is see a need, fill a need. And right now, especially in the current climate of the world, I think that we're missing people that are an encouragement to one another.
Yeah, true.
You know, just because then we have wars going on and we have people within leadership that we might disagree with and may or may not be collapsing the entire world around us. Unfortunately, this is just the way of history. There isn't anything that we're dealing with that's totally unique, except for maybe the invention of AI. Then our forefathers and ancestors didn't deal with their whole life. I don't think that the future is totally bleak. I think that if we equipped our kids and equipped individual people and everything to be able to go out into the world, then we can weather the storm, and we're going to come out stronger because of that, and we can make a better future for our kids before Jesus returns and fixes it all for us anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much.